Well, before everyone here has an opportunity to ask you some questions, just finally, how do you top this? What do you go on to next? What's in store for the next 6 to 12 months for two filmmakers travelling around the world?
So I've kind of overbooked myself a little bit. So I'm with the Volvo Ocean Race from January into February. I then fly to Nepal to train for Everest.
Relatively busy.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's really stupid.
Documentaries wise, I'm following a guy who is a member of the circus community, gypsy, living in Suffolk, who is trying to solve Tesla's electrostatics theorem and solve the free energy that we all need in the world, from his little back room in a Suffolk farm.
Do you speak Spanish, and when you were there, were you staying with them in the same ranch, or did you have a tent? The logistics of it.
I've been trying to speak Spanish but still don't speak Spanish. Logistics wise, we were completely with them, so we'd be sat by the fire with them in the evening. I mean, the only separation between them and us was that we had a slightly different tarpaulin that we were sleeping under than compared to them. But the logistics were basically just sleeping bag, sheet, and it's the fire is the only survival thing for them. I think in that situation, when you have a really heavy weather day, if you didn't have a fire that night, you'd be in serious trouble, like almost straight away. So them making a fire was like a complete art form. They just wander off with an axe, and 5 minutes later there's a fire, and it's been raining for the last like 48 hours.
And I speak Spanish, but like not fluently, but quite well. And I've worked on productions in Spanish-speaking countries before, like Cuba the year before. But had I been fluent, as our fixer was Max, who knew these guys and had travelled with the family before, the uncle, in fact, the brother of Papo, he would be the first to tell you, as I do now, that the dialect is so thick. It's like this argot of, there's a lot of Italian in there, there's a lot of like North Spanish, like Basque, like kind of stuff. You'll see that they wear berets. That's the Basque heritage. Very sort of like mysterious, the background to how the Gauchos sort of came about and what's the culture. And their language, I think, really reflects that. It's a real like hodgepodge of a lot of different things. They'll say capo, like an Italian, and there'll be English words in there, German words in there. It's a real sort of mix and reflective of, I think, how isolated those communities are. So really, they would talk to each other, and when they didn't want us to know, they would just ramp up the dialect, ramp up the accent, and. We had nicknames, they gave us like nicknames, Gringo Mantequilla, Gringo Washington, and and if they didn't want to be understood, they would like not be understood.
How he came to live there, when he came to live there, whether he went there on his own, whether he lived there with his wife, and how old he was when he first started that lifestyle.
20 years he had built that particular hut himself, his log cabin, and so he'd been there for 20-25 years, and he was 80, but he had been they call them peon, which is you don't own the land like he says, but you run and manage the land for generally a landowner, an estanciero. But this in particular is so remote that actually estanciero owns it. It's not really commercial land, it's too complicated to get the cows to market. So what it is it's just national park, and he has the right to graze his cattle there. And his background, his son died, as he says. He has 2 daughters. One of them works in a pharmacist, the other one is a teacher, I think. But I think it was just the one son that he had, and he unfortunately died. He'd been a fisherman. He'd been gauchoing for a bit and then became a fisherman. Some people don't take to it.
Was it unexpected that Papo actually proved more interesting in a way than Rial?
We were expecting to just film Rial, no one else. But once we kind of got to know Papo and Diego and Franco, we kind of realised that actually we don't really want this film to be about the death of the culture and one old gaucho representing the entire community. We wanted it to be a kind of representation of change. And I was really keen for Franco to come out as being a kind of metaphor for the future, and it just happened that Papo was such a kind of strong character that he sort of, in trying to film Rial and Franco, we sort of accidentally ended up on Papo, just because he's such a strong character and kind of the linchpin, not just to the film but to the whole community, and we felt that that's probably the direction we should go.
What Gauchos would say themselves about their own culture, whether they feel a sense of urgency that it's disappearing.
And I think it's a reach to say that Rial is the very last person to do what he does. But I think Papo was drawing a distinction to say, there's me, I have a wife, I base myself relatively close to VO Higgins, which is a town which has a road into it, and then there is this old relic of the old ways who lives up in the hills, and he lives in this way. And I think he said, he's the last Gaucho, but in another time he said, I think there's probably in the whole of South America, i.e. like the whole of Chile and Patagonia, there's probably only 30 people who are like living in like homesteads by themselves like that. That was the number that I remember Papo saying to me.
The only reason he goes out into the wilderness for that extent once a year is to go and resupply Rial. And when Rial dies, he won't have that same excuse anymore, and potentially the skills of making the fires and going out into the mountains and finding they'll spend a whole day and find one cow. I think he realises that side of things is going to disappear, and it'll become much more like Texas and Kansas, where you have fenced off areas and your cattle are in there.
And that's worth reinforcing what Tom said, is that those cows weren't in the corral originally when the corral was broken. They were put into the corral and they escaped out of the corral. They spent all year in the mountains, and when he wants to get them, to drive them to market, to depoint them, to castrate them, to work them, he has to go into the mountains to find them. And we went on a day's trek, which we filmed, as you can see, and we personally in 8 hours didn't see them, and eventually they went on and we came back home and eventually they found some more. So that gives you an idea of how difficult the life is and how free range the beef is.